All right, so if we want to make an interactive demo, we're going to need some interactive tools. I'm going to be showing off some of the tools that I've made so far for this. Here's the first thing that I made. It's basically a much more souped up version of this morphology viewer. So if you remember this one, this got its 3D model, as I mentioned earlier, from Wormbase. This was a Blender file, which I downloaded, and then I just reorganized some of the stuff so that it's easier to interact with and look at and work with. So the way I've done this is basically I've copied that 3D model into Unity. And I also grabbed the nervous system, which you don't see here yet until it loads. I copied the nervous system from this project from OpenWorm called C302. C302 was basically their framework for building up the neural network for simulation. And what I did is I just ripped the neural morphologies or the nervous system structure from that, and I brought it in as stuff into Unity. So basically, the way I've made it, you can rotate around the worm and look really detailed in there and zoom in and look around. And there's going to be a variety of ways to interact with the data. So you can see if I click on a neuron, like this one, you'll get description, the receptors, transmitters, peptides, and ion channels. There's going to be a lot more work I'm going to do to make this UX a lot more nice. Sort of like when you go to a museum and you interact with one of the. I just recently went to the Anchorage Museum in Alaska, and they had this amazing view for all these different objects. And you could click on one, everything else would basically like disappear. So and you would get this great like data view, and you could interact with it. And so that's sort of the thing I'm aspiring for here. But for now, you can click on this neuron, you can get a description. These are from an AI generated data source that I sort of quickly whipped up. I will definitely go back and update this with literature and stuff like that. And I'd like it to be much more descriptive. The rest has been taken from OpenWorm directly. And I'll show you that data set soon and a little bit of how I played with that. That data set, by the way, was OW Meta. And so if you want to grab any OpenWorm data, this would be the place to grab it. So this being a 3D model in Unity, I can, and the way I've organized it, I can basically hide a lot of things. So something people may often want to do is just look at the muscles, for example. So I eventually want to make it so like it hides bits and stuff. And so you could see just the motor system, sort of, at least the muscles. And it can also help you contextualize what's really going on. So these neurons that are close to the muscles, these are the motor neurons, and they wrap around and activate various muscles that you can see here. There's also a kind of fun thing if you start adding bits. So you can imagine like I could want to learn about the excretory system. So I go to the anal muscles here and I see this bundle of neurons pretty close to the anus, and I see this stretch sensitive interneuron. And I may want to sort of ask the AI agent like what this neuron's responsible for, and it can help me contextualize what its purpose is. Then I can try to create experiments, neural activities and stuff that should make this part of the worm behave as it should. And so there's all sorts of fun things you can imagine doing with this data viewer where the data, the anatomy, everything is sort of contextualized together. And so this is sort of the idea for the first stage of the interactive viewer. I'm going to show you there's some other ways to interact with the data. Oh, connectome is broken. We're not going to touch that for now. I will talk about that for a second. But more interesting is in reverse. If you have a particular neurotransmitter you're interested in, you can see where it's expressed in the anatomy of the worm, and it lights up all the neurons that release that particular neurotransmitter. Or you may be interested in a certain ion channel, and we can just sort of pick one, and you can sort of see where that particular ion channel gets expressed. And that's sort of the real dream of like what this would do, is it would let you interact with the data, but also like develop your experimental setup. So just a little extra information. I'm developing the connectome view and the segment view. The segment view is sort of something you would imagine if you were someone doing a really detailed thing. So I'll show you an example. If I were to just click on a bit of this neuron, this is an actual part of the neuron. And within this one section, this is sort of back to the molecularly annotated connectome question rather than the regular connectome. We want to see where stuff might actually be distributed. And so when you run a simulation, you actually want to distribute different ion channels, receptors, transmitters, etc., at various parts of the neuron and give them different distributions. And so this is sort of a view, would be a view of segment by segment where certain things are distributed. Now, this data doesn't actually exist. We don't actually have it. So I'm going to have to make that up if I want to allow for the segment view. We'll see if we actually end up going down that route. As for the connectome, for reference, I can use one of the previously mentioned connectome viewers. This is called nematode. This one can show you various different connections, and not only that, which paper found those connections, and for various neurons. So I could just go AVAL. Boom. Now we see which neuron is connected to which other neurons. And so the idea would be similarly to sort of like blow up this model into more of a graph, and you can see the connections, or just draw lines and maybe drop out the rest of the anatomy. We'll see how this actually pans out in terms of, a lot of this is going to be really UX questions, like which is fun. It's fun to think about what is actually going to be interesting and not interesting. Okay, so this is sort of stage one of the demo. Should be very exploratory. You can look around. And then we're obviously going to put this on Rails. We're not going to let people do whatever they want. But we'll give them an option of one or two scenarios, basically, where they can actually try to now run a certain simulation. And this simulation is going to contextualize things to the real body in a real environment. So I'm working on the physics simulator part of this. And the idea here would be that you can play with the actual worm simulation in action and see what's happening at the same time. So you can see that what I have here is a soft body simulation. I've grabbed the actual mesh here that we're using from the paper that I mentioned a few videos ago, BAAI worm. It's this one where they tried to simulate the brain, the body, etc. all together. And so I grabbed their 3D model and I plugged it into this simulator. You can see that it uses OB soft body. That is the physics simulator. That is the Unity asset that I'm using. We'll see if I stick to this. It's soft body simulations can get really finicky. But basically, you can see these like groups you can sort of make. So I've gone about making a way of making muscle groups, basically, that then can contract. And the idea is you'll be running this physics simulator, and at the same time, you will also be running the nervous system simulation, and they'll be connecting to each other. Now, how much of this is going to be really happening versus pre-baked is a good question, but you can sort of imagine these two things together, this physics sim, this thing, both running at the same time, the worm's moving, this is working. You've seen that sort of video from the previous episodes of how that's intended to work, and so that's the whole thing. I may move this nervous system visualization that you're seeing over there back to the other viewer, And it would be nice if you could see everything in one scene. So you could see this with the nervous system and everything all in one scene. And the last bit for this one that I just wanted to talk about real quick is what the muscle groups sort of look like. So there's this generator for the muscle groups. And so you can see that here. If I click on this and I hit edit, these are the muscle groups that have been generated. It's not doing a great job of viewing them, but basically you can see that I can contract different bits of the worm and they should be mapped to various neurons. And so that's the idea there. So you'll run this simulation, and then there's going to be a sort of post-game analysis. And so let's talk a little bit about what that would look like. So I've been doing, again, some of the data collection from OWMeta, which is OpenWorm's database. And I've got all the different receptors, which neurons they're present in. This is also in the anatomy viewer. But you can imagine this will be part of the corpus of data that like an agent could interact with. On top of that, I've also been doing some things like grabbing some web resources and scraping them. So like this textbook, I'd like to have Wormbook available as well as Worm Atlas maybe, and have that all in like one big corpus here. And you can imagine you can ask questions of the agent once you get to that stage, maybe about the actual experiment or anything. Like we could even put it in the anatomy viewer, and you can ask, what would you expect aberrant behavior of blah 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 neurons to do in an experimental context? And it would, you have to work on this, but it would give you citations, and it would tell you sort of where it got the information from the data. And you could also, it would tell you, you'd sort of build hypotheses about what you expect to happen. And so you can go back to your experiment and ask, well, if I change this amount of dopamine or whatever, which neurons should be affected? And you can look for those actual results and sort of have a back and forth with the model, and it would generate the data so you can actually talk to the model about the data that was generated from the experiment, sort of have a back and forth. That's the whole idea, is it would be this whole closed loop demo of what the future of a researcher's toolkit could look like with all these novel tools and iterations in simulation, data collection, etc. And so that'll be the culmination of everything. In the next video, I will actually talk about how we're going to try to go about doing that. It's certainly going to be a lot of work to trim this down and also make it a really good story. We can make it really immersive. We can make it really fun, sort of make it feel like a Disney World ride of the future, but for research. That's the idea. It's going to be very much on Rails. We're going to limit a lot of the options that people actually have, but the platform and the back end should hopefully look very real and in theory be very extensible. This is something that I'd, beyond the demo, actually like to see brought to fruition eventually.